I always thought people only broke down in movies, with cinematic tears and soft background music. But he was right there in front of me, trembling and crying into his hands, and I had no idea what to do except sit down and hold him. The funny part? We had never even talked before that night. Not once. It was a Tuesday, a late one, and the small town of Ashwood had already gone to sleep. Most nights, the streets stayed empty after 9. But I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk, headphones in, trying to drown out the static in my head. That was when I saw him sitting alone on the bench near the gas station, looking like the world had just caved in on him. I recognized his face immediately. Everyone knew of him, even if they didn't really know him. His name was Adrian Cole. Senior year. Always quiet, always keeping to himself, like some sort of ghost walking through the halls of Ashwood High. He wasn't the kind of guy you stopped to talk to in the hallway. He was the kind of guy you noticed sitting in the back of class, scribbling in notebooks like the rest of the world didn't matter. And yet, right there under the flickering streetlight, Adrian didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a boy who had finally run out of ways to keep himself together. I hesitated. I could have just walked past, pretended I hadn't seen him. That's what most people did. Stay out of it. Mind your own business. But something in the way his shoulders shook, like each sob cost him more breath than he had to give, forced my feet forward. I sat down, close enough to show I wasn't just passing by, but not too close to scare him off. He didn't look up. His hands covered his face, knuckles white, and the sound of his breathing was rough, uneven. For a moment, all I did was sit there, the silence stretching, my chest tightening with something I didn't understand. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out. My arm slipped around his shoulders, clumsy and unsure. I expected him to flinch, to push me away. Instead, he leaned. Just slightly, just enough to let his weight rest against me like he had no strength left. And that was how it began. He didn't speak, not at first. I didn't either. Sometimes silence says more than words, and in that moment, silence was the only language we had. My heart pounded against my ribs, because here I was, holding a boy I had never spoken to, and somehow it felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. It wasn't until the sobs faded into hiccups, his breath hitching as he tried to steady himself, that he finally whispered, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said softly. He shook his head, pulling away just enough to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, glistening, but God, they were beautiful. Not in the polished way you see on TV, but raw, human, vulnerable, like windows into a storm. "You don't even know me," he said, voice breaking. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but you looked like you needed someone, so here I am." That earned me the smallest, most fragile smile, the kind that looked like it might shatter if the wind blew too hard. And in that smile, I felt something shift, like the universe had tilted, and we were both suddenly standing in the middle of something neither of us had asked for but both desperately needed. The night stretched on. He didn't tell me everything, not yet. Just fragments, scattered pieces of whatever had broken him enough to end up crying alone on a bench past midnight. I didn't press. I listened. Sometimes he went quiet, staring at the cracked pavement, and I let the silence sit with us. Sometimes he laughed bitterly at his own words, and I tried to smile, even if it hurt. And somewhere in between those broken sentences and heavy silences, I realized something terrifying. I wanted to protect him, not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but because holding him there, feeling his weight against me, had awakened a part of me I didn't even know was alive. The thing about small towns is, everybody thinks they know your story. They write it for you before you've even had the chance. For me, I was the kid from the decent family, decent grades, decent future. Nothing spectacular, but safe. For Adrian, he was the loner, the outcast, the boy nobody bothered to figure out. But sitting there that night, I understood none of them knew him. Not really. And now, somehow I did. Or at least I wanted to. When the clock on the gas station sign flicked from 1:59 to 2 a.m., Adrian finally whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not walking past." Those words stayed with me long after he left that night. Because the truth was, I almost did. And if I had, maybe his story and mine never would have collided. But they did. And that collision was only the beginning. What I didn't know then was how messy it would get. How much it would hurt. How much I would care. What I didn't know was that holding him on that bench was the start of a storm that would tear through everything I thought I understood about myself. About him. About what it meant to love someone who wasn't supposed to fit into the story others wrote for you. But if I had known, I still wouldn't have walked away. Because some people you're meant to meet, no matter how late, no matter how broken, no matter how impossible it seems. And Adrian Cole was one of them. I used to think love was something you planned for, something that grew out of logic and certainty. But with Adrian, it came in like a storm, loud, messy, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. And yet, somewhere in that chaos, I found a kind of peace I never thought I'd deserve. The weeks after that night blurred into a series of stolen moments. Sitting with him in the library after school. Walking home slower than necessary just to drag out the time together. Late-night texts that started short and awkward but quickly grew into paragraphs neither of us could stop sending. But Ashwood was a small town, and small towns had eyes everywhere. Whispers followed us down hallways. Why are they always together? Doesn't he know what people say about Adrian? And, the worst of them all, you think he's? It wasn't long before the whispers turned sharp. My friends asked why I bothered. My parents noticed my late nights and the quiet way I avoided their questions. Adrian, on the other hand, acted like it didn't touch him, but I knew better. Behind closed doors, in those fragile hours when it was just us, I saw the way he winced when he thought about the rumors. The way his voice cracked when he admitted he was tired of being treated like a shadow. One night, in his small cluttered room, I found the courage to ask, "Why were you crying that night?" He went still, the pen in his hand frozen above his notebook. His eyes didn't meet mine. For a long time, silence stretched between us until I thought he'd never answer. Then, softly, he said, "Because I thought nobody would ever notice if I disappeared." My chest caved in at those words. I wanted to say something anything that could erase the pain, but all I could do was slide my hand across the bed and cover his. "I notice," I whispered. "I always will." That was when he finally let me kiss him. Not some dramatic, movie-perfect kiss, but a trembling, tentative press of lips that tasted like salt and hope. My whole body shook, not from fear but from the sheer gravity of what it meant. From that moment on, I wasn't just holding him, I was choosing him. But love, real love, doesn't come easy. A week later, someone scrawled words on Adrian's locker. Ugly ones. The kind that don't fade even when you scrub them off. He tried to laugh it off, but I saw his hands shaking. The way his eyes darted like he wanted to run and never stop. I wanted to fight for him, to scream at everyone who didn't see him the way I did. But Adrian stopped me. "Don't," he said, voice steady but eyes full of fear. "You'll only make it worse." So I held it in. I held him tighter instead. The breaking point came one Friday night when my father caught me sneaking back in after walking Adrian home. He didn't yell at first. He just asked where I'd been, who I was with, why I looked so guilty. I tried to lie, but the truth slipped out in the way my face gave me away. "You've been with him," he said flatly. When I didn't answer, the silence told him everything he needed. His disappointment hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke me. "We didn't raise you for this," he muttered. I wanted to fight back, to tell him he was wrong, that Adrian was the best thing that had ever happened to me. But the words stuck, tangled in fear and shame. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was worth the cost of losing everything else. It was Adrian who gave me the answer. The next evening, as we sat together on the roof of his house, the cold biting at our skin, he turned to me and said, "You don't have to choose me, you know. I wouldn't blame you if you walked away." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about?" His eyes shimmered in the dim glow of the streetlights. "I don't want to ruin your life." Something inside me snapped then, sharp and certain. I grabbed his hand, holding it so tightly it almost hurt. "You don't get it," I said, voice breaking. "You're not ruining my life, you are my life. You're the only thing that makes sense anymore." Tears welled in his eyes, And before he could argue, I leaned in and kissed him again, harder this time, desperate to prove every word. His hands clutched my shirt, pulling me close, and for the first time in weeks, the world outside of us didn't matter. The whispers didn't stop. My father's disappointment didn't fade overnight. The town didn't magically become kind. But what we had was real, and for once that was enough. Because love isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and still choosing each other anyway. The last night of senior year, we climbed that same rooftop, wrapped in a single blanket against the cool spring air. The sky above us blazed with stars, and the whole world felt on the edge of something new. I used to think I'd never get out of here, Adrian whispered, his head resting against my shoulder. I squeezed his hand. We will. Together. He smiled then, soft and certain, like he finally believed it. And as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the world in pink and gold, I realized something. We hadn't just found each other, we had saved each other. We never talked before that night. But one night he cried, and I sat beside him holding him. And from that moment on, nothing was ever the same. Not the town. Not my family. Not me. And definitely not us. Because sometimes the quietest collisions change everything. And sometimes, when the world feels too heavy to carry, the right person shows up, sits down beside you, and refuses to let go. Adrian was that person for me. And I was that person for him. Always. Forever. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.